France is one of the richest countries in the world, home to luxury brands like Chanel and Christian Dior, auto manufacturers and aerospace companies like Renault and Airbus. It has built high-speed railways, infrastructure and elite universities that are envied all over the world. And it has built up an extremely generous social model. For decades, it has managed to balance its economic ambitions with a deep commitment to public welfare. But beneath the surface, pressure is mounting. Growth is slow, debt is rising, and the political system is straining under some very difficult and pressing issues. To understand how France arrived at this point, we need to step back. Because the tensions between state control and the social model aren't new. They've been part of French society for a very long time. In the 17th and 18th centuries, France was placed among the most powerful and wealthy nations in Europe. It had vast agricultural land, a rich monarchy, and a thriving culture of science, philosophy, and the arts. But even back then, cracks were forming. The economy was heavily centralized, dominated by a complex web of taxes and privileges that benefited the aristocracy and burdened everyone else. Not surprisingly, when the revolution came in 1789, the old system collapsed, the monarchy was overthrown, and the country began rebuilding from the ground up. In the centuries that followed, France swung several times between chaos and control. Its industrialization was slower than Britain and Germany, partly due to war, political instability, and a lingering distrust of large-scale capitalism. But by the late 19th century, France had become a modern industrial economy. Still, it was never quite the same kind of capitalist engine as the United States or its neighbors. French industry remained fragmented, and the state always played a bigger role in the economy. After World War II, France found itself devastated. But this period also marked the beginning of its so-called Trente Glorieuses, and apologies to French listeners for the pronunciation. This referred to 30 years of glorious economic growth from 1945 to 1975. With American support through the Marshall Plan and a huge reconstruction effort at home, France built new industries, modern infrastructure, and an impressive welfare state. The government took the lead in planning the economy, directing investment into key sectors like transport, energy, and defense. French living standards soared. They called this model derigism, from the French verb diriger, meaning to direct. And it worked. This was the era when France became famous for its generous social protections, high-quality healthcare, and long holidays. But the good times didn't last. The oil shocks of the 1970s, rising global competition, and the rigid structure of the French labour market began to weigh the country down. Growth slowed, unemployment rose, and the state, once seen as the saviour of the economy, began to look bloated. Today, France finds itself caught between two economic identities, one as a modern, competitive European economy, and the other as a country deeply committed to its social model, even though it's becoming unaffordable. But let's take a step back. France is the world's seventh largest economy, a core member of the European Union, and home to global giants like Airbus, Louis Vuitton, and Total Energy. But beneath the surface, there are serious problems. The first is debt. France's public debt is over 110% of GDP and still rising. That's not necessarily unusual after the pandemic, but France is now one of the most indebted major economies in Europe. Interest payments alone are expected to reach 62 billion euros this year, roughly equal to what the country spends on both defense and education combined. And if nothing changes, that figure could hit 100 billion euros by 2029. The second is growth, or rather, the lack of it. France's economy has been growing slowly for years, and its potential growth rate, the speed at which it can grow without overheating, is worryingly low. This is partly due to an aging population, partly due to low productivity in some sectors, and partly due to a lack of business dynamism. Starting a company in France is still much harder than in the US or even the UK, and bureaucracy can feel like a full-time job. Unemployment remains a persistent problem, especially among young people. While the overall unemployment rate has improved in recent years, youth unemployment is still close to 20%. That creates a sense of frustration and alienation, particularly in poorer suburbs, where opportunities are scarce and public services are under pressure. Then there's the political challenge. Emmanuel Macron has tried to push through economic reforms. some of them unpopular, like raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. His argument is simple. The country cannot afford to keep spending like it used to, but every attempt at reform triggers protests, strikes, and widespread resistance. Even though the reforms won't be implemented until 2031, and the retirement age of 64 is significantly younger than many peers like Germany, Italy, the UK, or the Netherlands, where the retirement age is 67. And this is where we reach the heart of the problem. Even under normal circumstances, France would be in trouble. Public services are under pressure. The country is living beyond its means. Growth is sluggish. Debt is at historic highs. The deficit is wide, and interest payments are surging. Any one of these would require action. But when we combine them all together, it is clear that a day of reckoning is approaching. But things are even worse. These issues are just the beginning. You see, France's population is aging rapidly. In 2024, the old age dependency ratio stood at 34.8%, up from 28.3% in 2014. That means there are roughly 35 people aged 65 and over for every 100 working-age adults. And by 2050, that ratio is expected to rise to around 51%, or roughly one retiree for every 2 workers. Social spending already accounts for half of all government expenditure, and as more people retire and live longer, these costs will only increase. The government is fully aware of this. Prime Minister François Bayrou recently called the situation a vicious circle, a dangerous trap, potentially irreversible. His warning is stark. It is that an aging population means increasing demands on the public purse, just as the base of taxpayers is shrinking. That means reform is essential, but reform is hard when the government doesn't have a majority. And Macron's snap election last year backfired, leaving the parliament split into 3 rival blocs. And if the forecasts for 2050 look bleak, there are significant and much more current pressures already being felt. Prime Minister Bayrou is expected to announce the 2026 budget in mid-July, with the aim of reducing the public deficit from 5.4% of GDP in 2025 to 4.6%. This will not be easy, to say the least, and will almost certainly require the use of emergency constitutional powers for the budget's passage. This means we will probably face yet another no-confidence vote. You see, to get the deficit down from 5.8% to 4.6% next year, France needs a further 40 billion euros in cuts. That's about 1.4% of GDP. The government has floated plans to trim back healthcare subsidies, end some tax breaks, and introduce new anti-avoidance measures for the wealthy. Meanwhile, the Bank of France has lowered its forecast again, as a stagnant Europe, rising geopolitical tensions, and the threat of a global trade war are seriously damaging investor and consumer sentiment. As a result, growth is stalling and unemployment is projected to increase, albeit gradually. So what are the takeaways? First, France's decline does not have to be terminal, but the economy is under pressure. This is still a wealthy, innovative country with world-class infrastructure, global champions, and a strong social fabric. But it's also a country grappling with the cost of maintaining a level of public services that is unsustainable. Secondly, the demographic change is real. The aging population is more than just a future worry. It's already reshaping the economy. By 2050, France will have 1 retiree for every 2 workers. That puts enormous strain on pensions, healthcare, and the tax base. And it means that tough choices can't be put off forever. And third, reform is essential. If it is politically impossible, then there will be a crisis. Macron's government has managed to push through some controversial changes, like raising the retirement age. But the resulting protests and backlash have extracted a huge political cost. And Macron's decision to call early elections now looks like an inexplicable mistake. With a fractured National Assembly and a hung parliament, further reforms, the kind needed to reduce deficits and reignite growth, will be even more difficult to achieve. Probably impossible. And that's a serious problem, because reform cannot wait any longer. A link to the next video should be on your screens now. Just click it to keep watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please like, subscribe, and comment. Thanks for watching.